Hi folks, HR Funk here, with something I haven't done for a while, and that's a classic pistol review. Now if you saw my video from a couple of weeks ago, where I went over the detailed disassembly, inspection, and reassembly of a Smith & Wesson Model 5904 pistol, you already know, or you've already been introduced, to my new 5904, which is a representative of Smith & Wesson's third generation of semi-automatic pistols. But in that video, I didn't really go into the history of this pistol, and I didn't review it at all. So that's going to be the subject of today's video. And one of the things that is a little bit difficult sometimes, particularly with a firearm like the third generation Smith & Wesson semi-autos, is trying to determine exactly where to begin their story as I make the video and inform all of you. And it's especially true with this pistol because, along with having a history of its own, I have some history with this pistol. Not this specific one, but with the Smith & Wesson 5904s in general. So I'm going to try to begin at a good beginning point and then bring the story up to present day. The lineage of the third generation of Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistols actually goes all the way back to the days just following World War II, when the U.S. military was interested in replacing the M1911 with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol that had a trigger action similar to the Walther P38, meaning a double action for the first shot and single action for each successive shot. Smith & Wesson began designing a pistol that would meet the military's requirements in the late 1940s, and ultimately, in an uncharacteristic show of common sense, the military decided to not switch pistols and stick with the 1911 since they had literally millions of them in inventory after World War II. But Smith & Wesson continued developing the 9mm semi-automatic pistol that they had begun to develop for the military, and ultimately in 1955 that pistol was released to the public, and in 1957, when Smith & Wesson adopted the numerical designations for their firearms, that pistol became known as the Model 39. In their development of the Model 39, Smith & Wesson succeeded in incorporating a Walther-style trigger mechanism that allows the first shot to be fired with a double action pull of the trigger. After that, the slide cycles and the hammer stays cocked, and then each successive shot is fired with a single action pull of the trigger. The design also utilizes a safety decocker that, when rotated downward, safely drops the hammer and allows the pistol to be placed back in that double action mode. The Model 39 features a 4-inch barrel, a lightweight aluminum alloy frame, and similar to the 1911, a barrel bushing that fits between the barrel itself and the pistol's slide. Unlike the 1911, the Model 39 features a full-length guide rod for the recoil spring. The original Model 39s, I believe, had a magazine with a 7-round capacity, but pretty quickly that was upgraded to an 8-round capacity. And the Model 39 also has a magazine disconnect safety, meaning when the magazine is removed, the pistol cannot be fired. In the late 1960s, the military again expressed an interest in Smith & Wesson semi-auto pistols, but this time around it was the Navy SEALs. And pretty quickly the SEALs decided they wanted a pistol with a magazine capacity similar to the Browning High Power, which used a double-stacked 13-round magazine. So Smith & Wesson went back to the drawing board and redesigned their Model 39 to accept a double-column magazine that held 14 rounds of 9mm ammunition. Speculation seems to hold that the Navy may have accepted a few of the newly redesigned Smith & Wesson semi-autos with the higher capacity magazine, but it was still never widely adopted by the military. So in 1971, Smith & Wesson released their 14-shot 9mm pistol to the public and called it the Model 59. Other than the modifications necessary to accommodate the higher capacity magazine, the Model 39 and the Model 59 were essentially the exact same pistol. Outwardly, the only real difference between the two, other than the wider frame on the Model 59, was the fact that the Model 39 has a curved backstrap and the Model 59 had a straight backstrap. In the late 1970s, the U.S. military was again looking at transitioning from the 1911 pistol to a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. And again, Smith & Wesson was interested in vying for the contract. You see a pattern developing here? In any regard, in an effort to submit a pistol for the M9 trials, Smith & Wesson redesigned their Model 59, and although it was not selected by the military, they eventually incorporated several of the changes from that modified 59 into their entire semi-automatic pistol line. Among those modifications were changes to the sights, changes to the finish, changes to the material the pistol was made from. Also, most noticeably, as we can see here on my 745, Smith & Wesson adopted a squared-off, checkered forward portion of the trigger guard. And this was something that at the time was fashionable with a lot of shooters who wanted to place the first finger of their non-shooting hand in front of the trigger guard when they were shooting. That has since faded away, but that's also the reason the Beretta pistol has that radiused front to their trigger guard in the same place. The changes to the Smith & Wesson semi-automatic lineup were significant enough that they redesignated their firearms. What had been previously the Model 59 became, in a stainless steel format, the 659, and in a blued steel format, the 459. Similarly, the Model 39 in stainless steel became the 639, and the blued steel version became the 439. To me anyway, the second generation of Smith & Wesson semi-autos really seems like a prolonged transitional period. Because of the entire 50-odd years that Smith & Wesson produced this style of semi-automatic pistol, the second generation really only lasted for about 7 or 8 years of that time. Eventually, toward the end of the 1980s, Smith & Wesson again decided to redesign their entire semi-automatic pistol line, and this is where I enter the story. I've talked before about the year 1988 and how at the time, as a Lance Corporal in the United States Marine Corps, I was living in a tent on the backside of an air station in South Korea. And you might not realize it, but there's not a lot to do when you're living in a tent on the backside of an air station in South Korea. I did manage to get my hands on 3 or 4 firearms magazines, which by the time I got them were several months old. But during the time that I was there, I must have reread those magazines each about a dozen times, which is why to this day I still remember some of the articles that I read in those magazines and even some of the advertisements. And one of the advertisements that I saw indicated that Smith & Wesson was coming out with a new design for their semi-automatic pistol lines. In fact, I remember the photograph on the magazine page which depicted a firearm that I eventually would realize was a newly designed Smith & Wesson 6906. So now let's wind the clock forward 1 year to 1989. By that time, I'd gotten out of the Marine Corps and I'd been hired by my first police department here in Ohio. That was a small village police department that required officers to purchase their own sidearms. And I knew I wanted to purchase one of the new third-generation Smith & Wesson semi-autos. What I really wanted was one of the all-stainless steel Model 5906 pistols, but they cost a whopping $65 more than the blued steel 5904. And in those days, $65 was a lot of money to me. So I ended up purchasing one of the then brand new 5904 pistols, and this was in the fall of 1989, so it would have been some of the very first 5904s ever produced. And 30 years ago this month, that's the pistol that arrived with me when I showed up for my first day of police academy training at the Ohio State Highway Patrol Academy. I used that 5904 throughout my academy training, where it performed very well, and I also carried it for my first 6 months or so as a police officer after graduating the academy. By the fall of 1990, I'd heard the siren song of the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge, and I ended up trading my original 5904 on the first 4006 that I found in my area. And that was the last time I owned a Model 59 series pistol for 30 years. Flash forward to a couple of weeks ago, which was within days of the 30th anniversary of my arrival at the police academy with my 5904, and I was at a gun show and I happened across this Model 5904. And if you saw the disassembly an inspection video. You've already seen this pistol up close, but it is a very well-maintained example of the 5904 pistol. And in honor of my 30-year anniversary of having arrived at the Academy, I brought this one home with me. This 5904 differs slightly from the one that I took with me to the Academy, in that the early ones still had the squared off trigger guard, similar to my 745 that I showed a few minutes ago. Also, it had the original Smith & Wesson style sights, whereas this one has the Novak sights. But otherwise, this pistol is identical to that one that I purchased all the way back in 1989. When I purchased that 5904 all those years ago, it still had the 14-shot magazine that had been around since 1971 when the original Model 59 was introduced. Very shortly thereafter, Smith & Wesson redesigned the magazine and came out with a 15-shot version, and that's the one that was with this pistol. This pistol, by the way, was manufactured in 1992. Now, as I said, after trading my original Model 5904, I never personally owned another 59 series pistol until I purchased this one. However, when I changed police departments in 1991, the department that I went to issued the Model 5943, which was a pistol with the full-size Model 59 series frame mated to a shortened 69 series barrel and slide. And the 5943 was also a double action only variant. And what I found with both my original Model 5904 and that 5943 that I carried for so many years is that they are extremely reliable, very accurate, very dependable pistols. The other thing that I didn't know when I bought that original 5904 all those years ago was how much I really liked that alloy frame. For reducing the weight of the pistol, it makes it a little quicker handling, and it also makes it a little bit more comfortable to carry on your waist all day long. And that was the same quality that that 5943 pistol had that I carried for about a decade. In terms of a review, the 5904 pistol retains the blued steel slide and the alloy frame construction going all the way back to the Model 59. The third generation did, however, do away with the removable barrel bushing. There is still a bushing there, but it's press fit at the factory, so it no longer comes apart when you disassemble the pistol. And in order to accommodate that, the contour at the end of the barrel was changed. This pistol, being 1992 vintage, has the Novak style 3-dot sights, although the original Smith & Wesson sights that were on my Model 5904 all those years ago did have a 3-dot system. They just were not Novaks. Obviously, it still has the same traditional double action, with the first shot double action and each successive shot being fired single action. And it has the decocking safety, which by this time was an ambidextrous decocking safety. The third generation pistols dispensed with the 3-piece grips of the first and second generation and went to a 1-piece wrap-around plastic grip. And although, as I said, my original 5904 had that squared off trigger guard, you can see that by 1992, Smith & Wesson had gone back to a more rounded trigger guard, similar to that original Model 39, but still retained the checkering on the front of the trigger guard. Smith & Wesson also retained the magazine safety, which renders the pistol safe when the magazine is removed. Now, this is a point of contention, and there are some shooters who very much do not like that feature. But what I'll tell you is there have been police officers who have been fighting with suspects for control of their firearm, who have managed to hit the magazine release, and even though they lost their pistol, the bad guy was not able to injure the officer with that pistol. So there is a safety feature or a safety component for police officers with regard to that magazine disconnect. And since these pistols were being marketed to police departments, which at the time, back in the late 80s and early 90s, who were transitioning from the traditional 6-shot revolver to semi-automatic pistols, that made a lot of sense for officer safety. Another safety feature that I believe was first introduced in the third generation pistols is a firing pin safety block. The firing pin safety block is a mechanism that prevents the firing pin from moving forward unless the trigger is completely pulled to the rear. So if the pistol is dropped and strikes muzzle first, or if the hammer receives a sharp blow, the firing pin cannot move forward and discharge the pistol. Also in the third generation pistols, Smith & Wesson purportedly improved the internal components to give a better trigger pull to the pistols. So let's find out if they succeeded. I'm going to start out with my Model 39, and I'll try the double action pull first. And the double action pull is actually too heavy to register on my trigger pull scale. So we know that the double action pull on the Model 39 is greater than the 12-pound limit on the Lyman trigger pull gauge. Let's try the single action pull and see where it breaks. Single action pull is not bad. Breaks at just a little over 4 pounds, 4 pounds, 2.9 ounces. Now let's try the 5904 and see how the trigger compares with it. And now let's try the trigger pull on the 5904. Again, I'll start with the double action pull and see if I can get a reading this time. And no, that's again going to be heavier than the 12-pound limit for the Lyman trigger pull scale. Let's try the single action pull. And the single action pull is considerably heavier. It's actually over 6 pounds on the 5904. So for whatever redesign to the trigger that Smith & Wesson may have done with the third generation pistols, at least with these two, the older first generation Model 39 has a better single action pull. And let's see if I can just tell subjectively what I think of that double action pull. It's not as smooth, but the double action pull on the first generation Model 39 is noticeably lighter. One last thing about the triggers on these Smith & Wesson semi-auto pistols, and this is really true regardless of the generation, and that is the reset, which is tremendous. When the pistol is fired and the slide cycles and the hammer stays in single action mode, the trigger only has to be released that far to reset and allow the pistol to be fired again. Try to keep my hand out of the way. Again, that far. Probably about a 1/16 of an inch in order to reset the trigger. And if you can train yourself to shoot that way, these are easy to shoot quickly and very accurately once they're in that single action trigger mode. And here's a quick check on the weight of the 5904. With the magazine in place, it's coming in right at 28 ounces on the official Cabela's scale. That's a full 3/4 of a pound lighter than the all stainless steel 5906. And here we see the benefit of that aluminum alloy frame. And that's pretty much going to do it for my shop review of the Smith & Wesson Model 5904. Now it's time to bundle up, brave the cold, head out to the range, and see how it shoots. And as you can see, I've arrived out at the range with the 5904 to put it through its paces and see how it's going to perform. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to start to shoot the 5904 through my standard handgun testing battery. And if you've seen my reviews before, you know that begins with a 30-foot slow-fire accuracy drill. And as I fire this drill, I'm going to be firing that first shot in double action mode, and then I'm going to be managing that trigger reset, as I was showing back in the shop, just to see what kind of accuracy I can get from this pistol. And that first double action shot was pretty much right down the pike. That was a real good shot. I pulled my second shot. The next three went right in here. This one I'm sure was just me getting a little bit shaky. It is kind of cool out here today. But the other 4 out of those 5 shots are in about 1 3/4 inches from 30 feet. So I'm not seeing anything that's concerning me too much. Let's move on and I'll try something else. And I'm now back to a distance of 50 feet from the target. From here, I'm going to pick up the shot tempo just a little bit and see how the 5904 performs from this distance. And I managed to keep them pretty well, center chest from 50 feet. Got that one shot that I pulled over to the left a little bit. The other ones are looking pretty good. So let's move on and try something else. And it's time for some 20-foot failure drills. From here, I'm going to be firing 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head in rapid succession. I think this is where we're really going to see the quick reset on this 5904's trigger start to shine. And yes, that quick reset with the light, short, single action pull made the failure drills from 20 feet very easy. And how about a multiple adversary drill, folks? This time I'm going to shoot 1 shot at the target on the right, 3 shots to target on the left, and then 2 more shots to target on the right, all in rapid succession to simulate dealing with 2 hostile adversaries at the same time. And again, no problem whatsoever. 3 shots stayed center chest on this guy, 3 shots stayed center chest on this guy, and our 2 hostile adversaries are both having a bad day. Folks, I've got to stop punching holes in paper. Some water bottle desperados just showed up on the scene. I'm going to use the 5904 and see if I can fend them off. And as usual, those desperados ducked and ran for cover, but in the end, they met their match in the 5904. Folks, it's time to find out, is the 5904 a 20-foot tack driver? Yes! On the first shot, the 5904 is a 20-foot tack driver. And just in case you missed it, that 20-foot tack driving shot was fired using the double action trigger on the 5904. Folks, these old 3rd generation pistols, to include the 5904, the duty pistol that I carried for 10 years that I mentioned earlier, the 5943, the 4006 that I carried for a while, and all the others, were good, reliable pistols, and if you find them on the used market, they're definitely worth taking a look at. The 3rd generation, after 50-odd years of continuous production and refinement and improvement, came to a pretty unceremonious end at about 2005. Even so, these pistols are still out there. You notice that the 5904 performed flawlessly throughout the test firing. By the way, this is the first time that I've fired it since I did the detailed disassembly and inspection, and obviously everything is working fine. So with that out of the way, I'm going to get out of the cold and we can head back to the shop for a few final thoughts. And there you have it, folks. That's my classic review of the Smith & Wesson Model 5904. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you order anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. See you next time, folks, and until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.